Hey guys, welcome to another script review where we review the best scripts for Maya right here in this channel. Today we are reviewing Morgan Loomis's amazing curve editing tools because he has way too many scripts that are way too good for you guys to pass on. And this one is specific for the graph editor, and I know all of you, if you're anything like me, love a little bit of graph editor love on your scripts to make your life a little bit easier, and this script is definitely one of those that you should keep in your shelf because it will most likely help you out on a daily basis. Let's get to it. So here we are once again in Maya. So you can see here right at the top that I actually install the ML anim shelf. So if you guys go to the Morgan Loomis website, which I will link down below, you can basically download all the tools at once right at the top instead of downloading them individually, and basically install all of them at the same time. And it includes a shelf, it includes icons, and it should look very much like this one here. Now the tool that we're going to be reviewing today is this one, the third one from the left, and it's called Animation Curve Editing. Now I have been using this tool for a while. There's a few more things that you can do with this tool, graph editor specific, that I'll leave for later, but this I think is a visual guide for you guys to basically have or do more with your graph editor and have to basically do less steps. That's basically what this allows you to do. It also has a few things to do with the time range, a few things to do with cutting and offsetting keys that hopefully will come in handy as well. These tools are 100% free. Morgan has made them free for a while. They have been around for a very long time. I was using these before I was a professional animator. So make sure you take advantage of this because Morgan is being incredibly kind by allowing these tools to be out there for free. But if you do use them, make sure to give him a shout out. Make sure to follow him on Twitter. I'll leave his link, his socials down below as well, because Morgan has done a lot of work on this, and I really think that it's worth giving praise to the people that are out there trying to make our job as an animator a little bit easier. Now, going through the tools, I'm just going to go ahead and open my graph editor right here. And then you can see here, I have basically a walk cycle of the spot just for demonstration purposes. And I will go through the tools so you can see more or less how it works. Now, Morgan is really good at actually giving you descriptions of what each tool does. As you can see here, as you move through the tools, you can see exactly what each tool does. So there are so many of them that sometimes even myself, I forget what they do. So hovering through these tools helps you to know what they do. Also, make sure you read the descriptions because it will make your life much easier. So going from the top, you can actually see here that you have non-linear editing workflows for animation curves. This is what the tool does. And then it tells you choose from which animation curves to affect from the drop-down menu. Now, this is the very first thing that you should do, is definitely act on the animation curves. Where do you want to actually set it up so it gives you more bang for buck. Sometimes you want to actually have it in the entire scene, very rarely, in all honesty. I normally have it on graph editor because I just want to make sure that this here affects only the graph editor. But you can have other things. You can have it on select channels, just like this, or you can have it on hierarchy meaning the rig itself, or graph editor like I have, or entire scene. Now, I like to keep it on graph editor because, you know, this is most likely going to be used together with this. And now we go off to the tools in here. Now we have offsets. I have covered here at the tools in the channel about offsetting keys. This is really useful for you to not have to move your keys either on your time range, on your timeline, or on your graph. It's always messy. I'm just going to select one channel to keep it simple, but it's always messy to have to select keys and then have to move them about this way. And it's even more messy to have to do it within a certain range right here, because then you get overlapping keys and you get half keys and it's a mess. So you normally want to rely on a tool like this to offset your keys. Now, in comparison to some of the tools that exist nowadays, this is very basic. There's other tools out there such as Animbot that do a better job than this and give you more options. But if you're looking for something free that gives you like something simple to do to offset your keys, then this is definitely it. So you can actually insert frame or offset your keys. Insert frame, I'm gonna actually start from the top left. So if you actually basically have whatever you have on your timeline right now, in your graph editor right now, you just go 5 and then offset, and he offsets all of the keys 5 frames. Now, bear in mind that this is basically based off your graph editor. So because you have graph editor here, anything that you change here is going to be affecting whatever you have on your graph editor right now. So if you actually want one channel only to be affected, if you actually want one channel only to be affected, you go offset and you notice that all the other channels are still at 0 and they haven't been affected. Now, because you have graph editor selected, if you actually change any of these settings, depending on what you have selected, so if it's this whole thing, it will affect the whole thing. But if you have only one channel selected, it will affect this one channel and all the other channels will be exactly as they were previously, right? So you can see here the difference between this curve and the rest. Now I'm going to go back to how it was to make sure that I can have my walk cycle properly, and I'm going to remove any offsets. Now it's back to normal. Okay, perfect. Now you also have cut frames. Cut frames is basically on the specific range. If you select cut frames, it will take those frames away from your curves. This is really, really useful because sometimes you don't want, for example, I don't know, a specific frame to actually look a certain way. So for example, here on your whole graph, you want to actually remove this frame. Normally, the way you have to do it without this tool is that you have to basically select everything, delete, and then bring everything back one frame to have it as you want it. With this tool allows you to have the same thing with less clicking. So just one click cuts your frame and moves your keys back. So it's very, very useful. Offset current frame to, yeah, so offset keys is very interesting because what it allows me to do is basically shift my keys to a specific frame. This is really useful for me, especially when I was cleaning up a lot of mocap and you want to shift the whole scene to another place. You have so many keys and it's so dense that your timeline is very much super dense and it's just red, right? So normally you have to double click everything just like this to select your keys and then basically move it back to 0. So let's say right here, I want to shift all these keys to 0. The way I do without this tool is basically select everything within the scene and then double click right here and then go to 0, right, on my time range. So now I have 0, and then basically, let me just delete this key because it's not meant to be there. And then basically shift all of this back to 0 like this. So you can tell that it's kind of messy and sometimes you have keys that are left over and all that stuff. Now with this tool, and I'm going to go back to what I had before. With this tool, what it allows me to do is basically like set my marker in my graph to the beginning or the end of the scene, or even if you want to do it in the middle, you can. And this frame specifically will be offset to whatever I want it offset to in the graph, in the time. So basically, if I actually set 0 here on my scene and I go offset current frame to, the whole thing will get offset to 0. So, sorry, I broke my scene, but you will see here that the whole thing here is actually now at 0. Now, I forgot some nodes in my character. This is why the whole thing is broken. But if I go back to 0 now, and I check my scene right there, about to frame 18, now my walk cycle, my run cycle, it's actually pretty much spot on as it was before. You just go back one frame and now you can see that my whole scene is now at 0 instead of being in the middle of nowhere. So really cool to just transport the whole thing into 0, especially if your scene is clean. This one wasn't, but if your scene is super clean, then everything should move correctly with no problem. Lastly, you have insert keyframe. Now insert keyframe does what it says in the tin, which is basically just going to open some space here in between, but it's basically like insert frame within a certain range. So if whenever you click it, he just inserts a blank frame within a certain amount. Now this is really, really cool because as you saw here, I actually open this from one frame to the other by grabbing and then moving things like this. But you can just go ahead and just select a certain area, and within your graph editor, just insert frames within that area. So it creates holes for your animation, which is another thing that we do all the time, especially when you're trying to retime things, or maybe you're actually blocking out and you actually want to add more time. This is incredibly useful. Now, one thing that I should mention here is that every single option here that you'll see now in the future, as I talk about them, if you right click, you have options to either create a shelf button for this specific action, or you can create a hotkey. I'm a big fan of hotkeys, right? But if you actually like your shelves, then you can go ahead like insert a shelf button that does that. So as you can see here now, my custom shelf has a button that does exactly what I want. So at any point, I don't have to have this thing open in order for me to do that anymore. I can just go ahead and do this and then click this button and have that happen at any point. Really, really cool from Morgan to actually get that for us. So very, very useful. Now, going back to the same tool, going back to ML and going back to this tool, we're gonna go ahead and go to cut. Cut allows you to basically do a bunch of different cuts on your graph. So let me just select one. Here allows you to cut before time range. So anything that I have selected here, I go cut before, and you'll see that anything before no longer exists on that controller, right? So I can do that for the whole character and then cut before, and you can see here that my frames have disappeared. You can also cut after, same thing. So cut selected range is basically based on your time range right here, and cut unselected range is basically the opposite, right? So it keeps only the range and everything else on the sides disappears. Really useful once again if you are cleaning up mocap and you're doing a certain section, then you can just press that button and anything that you have on either side of the mocap, like the actor getting ready or the T-posing, all of those things are unnecessary. Click that button, that actually disappears when you have your range selected. Really, 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 really cool. Now, scale keys is basically what it says on the tin. Once again, if you actually have it on the current frame like I have here, I can just kind of like go ahead and scale the time. So it can actually be like, for example, instead of being 100%, I want to scale time to 130%. And then it basically scales the whole thing to be 130% more. If you have it at 100, it's just basically real time. If you have it at 200, you know that you're actually slowing it down twice, right? So now you have a run that is twice as slow as it was before. So right here, now you have a run that is very slow in comparison to before, right? So that's basically what you would do with scale time, which is really nice, especially if you're trying to get your slow-mo into your animation. I always advise that people kind of like do their basic animation in real time so you can get a feel for it, and then use a tool like this so you can retime it and get the slow-mo, fast, slow, fast, slow. So really useful tool for you to retime things as you wish. Changing these things back to how they're supposed to be. This is 17 and just delete the key. There you go. Keep it clean. Now you have also scale value. So scale time basically scales your time from side to side. So from like on this axis, right? So this is basically scale time, and scale value is basically this, right? So this is basically what you have. Same exact thing, but for values on the Y axis. Now clamp. Clamp is cool as well, and you can use it not all the time, but sometimes, because there's values that are going to be above 0 and under 0. And based on above 0 or under 0, and I'm going to just select one channels to make sure that it makes sense. So let's say that for whatever reason, I actually don't want any animation on this controller above 0. I can just go clamp upper, and anything above 0 goes down to 0, and I'll make sure that I don't have anything that it goes above 0. Same thing with lower, there's the opposite, and you have make sure that nothing goes under 0. And then cleanup. Cleanup is absolutely my favorite tool out of the whole bunch here, and it's the stuff that I use the most. 100% I advise you guys to have a hotkey or a shelf button with this stuff, because especially if you're a mocap animator, definitely use this stuff, because it basically simplifies your graph editor to no end. Also, disclaimer, you need to know what you're doing before you use these keys, because if you use them and you are a novice animator, you might end up deleting channels that you might need later, right? So use at your own discretion, but this is basically incredibly useful for a bunch of different things that you can do, especially if you do it a lot. And if you have a few years under your belt, you know exactly what I mean when I say this will basically simplify things in your graph editor. Now I'm going to showcase a few examples here. So let's say right wrist here, right? So normally you have your translates and your rotates. You guys should know this. And you have basically your keys. You'll always, and you guys should also be familiar with this, you'll almost always have channels. So you normally also have these channels here, right? These channels that allows you to basically do different things to the wrist, elbow wrist, wrist paddle, things like that. Things that allow you to basically have extra controls on your fingers, on your hands, on your wrists, or whatever. Thing is, you don't really use them all the time, but they are always present here in your graph editor, even if they have no animation. So what I used to do in the beginning, because they used to annoy me, is basically go here and delete all the keys in order to not view them here, because they are annoying me, like this stuff, right? So now you have a clean graph, right? You're only dealing with the channels that have animation in them, because these are basically dead channels. Now this is basically that, right? Delete static channels. If you actually click this button right now, what will happen? Right? So you get all that stuff for free, but in the whole character, in all the channels, in all the controllers. So super beautiful. And you can see here that all of a sudden your graph is way simpler, because it's only taking into account the channels or the keys that actually are moving. And if anything is dead or nothing, then it basically doesn't give you, so it basically deletes it from existence. Now, on top of that, you have delete redundant keys and delete subframe keys. What is that? Now, I'm going to go here and maybe force it. So if this, I'm going to copy this value and add this value to this guy here to make sure that it's 100% flat, or like so. Now, once again, another thing that happens quite a lot is that sometimes you have keys like that, right? Keys that are not doing anything. And what you do as an animator, you just end up just going here and deleting them, and sometimes adding a little bit of, sauce to it by making it more interesting and all this other stuff, right? Now, this is a lot of work, and just doing that and deleting the keys, or if you have to do it multiple times over your graph in multiple channels, it takes you so much time. Now, in order for you to actually avoid all that time and save your time, you can just go ahead and basically, without selecting anything, as long as you have the channel selected, you can just go delete redundant keys. The redundant keys that basically this is talking about is these two keys, because the keys are not doing anything. So if I press it, those two keys disappear. Oh, there's probably a little bit of value on those. Yeah, so if I press it, they both disappear, and you can see that the redundant keys are gone. Now, deleting subframes is basically the half frames that you sometimes get in animation. Now, here I have it snapped, but if you actually were to basically grab this and do this stuff, right? You start having half keys. So I'm going to go ahead and see 1066, 1055, 1244. That's the massive no-no. So if you have that and it's only a few and it's bothering you and you have no need for them, which has happened to me a few times, you can go ahead and delete subframe keys, which basically anything that is half no longer exists, right? Now, make sure you don't need those keys. Make sure you snap them first if you do need them. And if you do need them and they're not snapping, then find another way to actually get them to be correct. Go to your graph editor and snap them manually before you delete any subframe keys, because you might end up deleting your animation, which is never good after all the hard work that you've done. So that is basically what this animation curve editing tool does for Morgan Loomis. Really, really cool tool. Highly advise you guys check it out, because I think that this is definitely one of those must-haves in your graph editor, especially given the fact that Morgan gives you always the chance to either add it as a hotkey or add it as a shelf button, you know, your choice. So highly advise you guys checking it out. If you like this tool from Morgan, definitely check out my previous video that I did about convert rotational order, another great tool to actually basically deal with Euler or gimbal in a much easier way. And check out all the other tools that Morgan has available, because he has so many that I can actually do a whole series just on his tools. So make sure you check them out. If this was useful to you in any ways, consider subscribing, consider liking the video, and definitely drop a comment down below if you're using this tool. Let me know how much you love it. If you're not, then once you do, let me know how much you like it and how useful it has been. Always, 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 if you have other tools that you want me to review in this channel, comment down below. Let me know what other tools would you like me to review, tools that I'm missing, because there's tools pretty much coming out every single day nowadays. So I'm pretty sure I'm missing a lot of tools that you guys have out there. So drop a comment, let me know what's cool, and I'll make sure to actually review them here in the channel next time. Now, shout out to my Patreons before I leave. You can see all their names here, all the cool people keeping this channel alive every single month. And that's all I had for you guys. I hope you guys have a great rest of the week. And until next week, stay well, stay safe. Peace.